Hi there, this is Matt with State of Flux here with a spoiler review for Scream. This is the 6th stab at the franchise, and for me, the weakest entry of the bunch. That said, even for a weak entry, I think Scream 6 is certainly better than any of the slasher films that we've had come out in the past couple years. Any revivals of Halloween, I dare say, or even Child's Play, I think fall victim to the worst aspects of the slasher genre that this film sometimes does as well, but this one is able to be elevated above it. But I will say, as being a Scream movie, it falls flat in a couple of different ways. I touched on this a little bit in my non-spoiler review, and I'm going to extrapolate here. So if you're watching this review, know that I'm going to spoil the shit out of Scream 6, as well as many of the other Scream movies prior. So if you haven't seen them, please watch those movies first. Part of the fun of Scream is the whole mystery element of it, and I don't want to be the one responsible for spoiling that for you. That is why these movies work. So, there you have it. That's my warning. I want to start off by saying I had a little bit of trepidation with this movie after the first full trailer. The micro teaser that we got of the killer on the subway was a really interesting and compelling journey for me. I was like, that is what this film needs. It needs the promise of something new. And this film often promised new to us repeatedly in its advertising campaign. But there was one element within the whole trailer that had me worried, which was when they revealed the Scream Shrine. And that was the first tip-off that maybe I was getting my hopes up for nothing. We're going to touch on that a little further on. Let's really go through this movie kind of beat by beat, and let me sort of sing the film's praises, and then also slam the film's weaknesses as they go. Alright, so the opening scene is relatively strong. It's kind of evocative of Scream 3 in a weird way, where you're having a misdirect conversation that eventually becomes a Ghostface one, and that was an interesting start, and it was interesting hearing Samara Weaving talking about slashers and stuff. I would have liked that conversation to grow a little bit more and hear more of her take on slashers before she gets slashed, but ultimately this film doesn't really want to deconstruct the genre as much as it wants to live in one element of the past, and again, we'll touch on that later. Samara Weaving is killed very early in the film, and for the first time we get something completely new with an opening scene. Much like the subversion of having the opening kill survive in the previous film, this one has the opening kill happen. Ghostface kneeled down to look and inspect the body and then pulls off the mask, revealing the killer in the opening scene. And this was the new freshness that I enjoyed. Yes, I love the mystery aspect of the Scream movies, but I think there's a way you can do a mystery aspect without having to fall to the conventions of all the prior movies. And I thought this would have been an interesting way to do it. Back in 1 year ago, I did a video about how I thought Scream 6 could go the Ghostface cult route. And I absolutely thought that's what we were going to get. We were going to get multiple reveals of who the killers were throughout the course of the film. But as it stands, that excellent opening that this film has of revealing the killer to be Flash Thompson was really kind of the ultimate misdirect, because that's what I think the filmmakers assumed the audience was there for and wanting. And you follow that character home, and then he gets a phone call that's very screamy or whatever, but also kind of has little echoes of the opening scene of Friday the 13th Part 2, where ultimately there's even a body in the fridge. they're fridging the whole idea, the concept of like this Ghostface cult right there in that moment. That story stops dead, and I don't know that you could ever really come back from that and utilize it for a future Scream movie, which is a little bit disappointing. I do have to praise the naming of that character is named Jason. The story takes place in Manhattan, and he's watching Friday the 13th. All of the elements here to remind you of Jason Takes Manhattan, and then immediately killing that character off is a message to the audience of, don't worry, we're going to utilize this city much better than that movie did with its promise. Did it? I don't know. That's a conversation for later in this video. But I liked the dig at Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. All of that was kind of neat and clever. The Ghostface kill is pretty brutal in that scene, as was the first one with Samara Weaving. And this is going to be the first part of my complaint. You can track what the killers are doing and the motives behind why they're doing it in each of the films. I think that's part of the brilliance of the Scream movies. You can figure out exactly who the killers are in the first Scream. They flat out telegraph it multiple times that it's Billy and Stu. And you watch it once for the fun mystery, you watch it a second time and pick up on how that mystery is exposed to you throughout the film and makes that viewing experience almost better. You'll never have that great surprise moment again, but it's really fun picking up on all the clues. You can even figure out who's killing who and why in each scene. There are context clues throughout, and I think one of these days I will do a fan watch-along of each of the Scream movies, because I am such a big fan. The same thing goes for Scream 2 with Mickey and Billy's mother. The interesting thing with that one is that their motives are in opposition to each other. Mickey is trying to recreate and be a copycat killer of Billy and Stu and following suit. She just wants revenge. So they're in opposition to each other, but you can even figure out who the killer is in that just by who's left-handed. The killer is always killing people left-handed, so if you just look at which of the characters outside of Ghostface are left-handed, you can figure out who, that Mickey is the killer. Again, we'll touch on that later. Scream 3 is probably the most similar to this film in a lot of respects, but the biggest one is the mystery element of who the killer is almost just a name plucked out of a hat. Because there are so many characters, but unlike the first two that sit you down and have you play the game of who is the killer, there's never a moment in Scream 3 where you're trying to figure that out in the first act of the film, because anytime you see some character, they're basically just there to be killed off. And the suspicion of who the killer is in that film is never really effectively drawn. You're not allowed much time to figure it out because the characters that you spend time with throughout the duration of that film are very much the characters that you know aren't Ghostface. And Roman is an afterthought through most of the first half of the movie. There's a couple little beats here and there of setting up who the killer is, but it's really not an effective mystery. And especially when you see that his character dies and then is not dead, and during his Ghostface reveal is kind of anticlimactic in a lot of respects. This film echoes that. We will touch on that later. Scream 4 is much more effective as a who is the killer thing, and I think it's because Kevin Williamson wrote Scream and Scream 2 and Scream 4. Aaron Kruger wrote Scream 3 and did rewrites for Scream 4 along with Wes Craven to make that film work because of studio interference or whatever. But you can track who is killing who. Essentially, Jill doesn't really kill anybody until the final fight in the house. Charlie is the killer of everything because he's being manipulated by her to do so. She wants to leave her hands clean and basically only kills Charlie and Trevor, and to frame the two people that she is supposed to have killed in the offing. And it's quite brilliant. If you're paying attention, you can catch all of that. Richie and Amber in Scream 5 do something quite similar, right? Richie is a killer that you can tell when it's him because it's a simple stab. It's often to the neck. He is likely the one that killed the cop in the in the hospital. He's definitely the one that killed Stu's cousin. He's definitely the one that killed Wes. It's a simple stab. You can tell that it's Amber because she does this quick, violent, like, just masquerade of violence. And it's not necessarily effective. Because she's going so willy-nilly with the knife, she's not hitting lethal zones. And that's why a lot of characters kind of survived that movie. And it was kind of an interesting, compelling, like, little note of how these characters basically survived the incidents. When you get to this movie, the ultimate reveal is that it's all tied to Richie. We're going to get to my problems with that later, but my biggest problem is that all the kills are essentially very much the same, and they're much more reflective of Amber's style of murder rather than Richie's style of murder. Richie does one quick swoop in an incredibly vital spot, often the neck. You'd think that the killers would have reflected that in this film, but they didn't, and that's kind of messed up and disappointing and bad continuity. The whole reason I brought up the whole like path of the killers to this point is because I want to illustrate this point. The point is, this film does kind of a really bad job of setting up who the killer is, and is ultimately what makes the last act of the film kind of fail and fumble, is that you're not given much of a time of the guess who is the killer kind of thing, because you have to be fairly confident that Tara can't be the killer because there's no way that opening scene in the first movie would have made sense anymore. They've already made a film and a half establishing that Sam couldn't possibly be the killer. So that eliminates those two. Gail is not going to be the killer because they would have told that story by this point, and the film stops and makes a little commentary on that. And you have to be fairly confident that Mindy and Chad probably aren't the killer because of how brutalized he was and how that reveal at the end of the house scene of the first movie wouldn't have made sense if Mindy was in any way in on it. So that eliminates those 5 characters. So when they are doing the pointing the finger thing, it's not really effective because there's really only 2 characters there. And the problem with having 3 killers in this is that the finger pointing thing, it doesn't really work because you're eliminating characters just for fodder, but are unwilling to kill characters that are not. And I'll touch on the bloodbath of it all in a little bit, but it's kind of plainly obvious that it has to be Jack Champion's character pretty early in the film because it's bound to be somebody tied to their friend group, and he's the last friend that's still involved with the friend group. Unless they do a Scream 3, and Scream 1 really, where they do the fake-out death where you think a character is dead, and then they're brought back. Which, oh wait, yeah, this film does that too with the Quinn character, the redhead. So you're likely to think it's either going to be one or the other. And the fact that you see that one girl get brutalized in the face, you know she's not coming back. So I had a suspicion that it was either going to be the Jack Champion character or it was going to be the redhead brought back to life. And then right from the trailer, I called that it was almost definitely going to be the cop and somebody else, or maybe just they're going to do the Scream 3 solo killer thing and just have it be the cop, because how else do you get all of the memorabilia from the previous movies if that would be impounded by police if you're not an officer that is going to have stolen that shit? So I called that from the trailer, and yeah, they have a throwaway line that, some cops aren't all good and they're going to sell this shit to the highest bidder. But that just didn't resonate with me, and I never once did not suspect that Dermot Mulroney was in on it. I assumed he did it. And for a little while there, I thought it was possibly him and Kirby, and there was a brief period where I thought it was exclusively Kirby, but her stature was what kept me from thinking that. The Kirby of it all is she's shamefully underused in this film, and the film never justifies her resurrection, which is really disappointing because she was my favorite character in Scream 4. And when they brought her back, I was a little skeptical, but I'd known that there had been a fan movement to bring her back ever since Scream 4. There was a lot of talk, even by Wes, of bringing her character back. He acknowledges it on the commentary. But Scream 5 had that little Easter egg during the clip from Stab 8 where you can see, if you look in the right spot, that Hayden's character is still alive. So when they brought her back, I thought it was gonna be more meaningful, and it really wasn't. If I had to guess, Neve Campbell's character, Sydney, was supposed to have a more meatier role in this. And likely, I'd heard rumors that Mark Kincaid, the husband character, was going to be from Scream 3, was going to be brought in as well, and there was probably a draft written with that being the case, and when she said no, it felt to me like they just merged the two characters together and made it be Kirby because they wanted the legacy. And it didn't work for me. Yeah, sure, I'll buy that Kirby wanted to stop these things, but I don't know. Something about that just didn't resonate as true, and there's a lot of that throughout the film. I wanted to believe Gail at the end of Scream 5 when she said that she would let these bastards die in anonymity, and I feel like there's a way to have the characters have that motive that they have in this film, the vengeance of Richie, play out with her having him died in anonymity. I think that is the much more reasonable story to tell, to have Gail for once not write the book, not cover the killings, and that's what brings these ones to come out, because this is something that their son died for, and they want revenge because he's the only Ghostface that will never be known or remembered. That is a much more believable reason for revenge than the one that we're presented, which is, that boy loved these movies. And that just rang a little hollow for me. And my understanding is the last act of this movie had to be heavily rewritten because it involved Sydney quite a bit, including the motives of the killers. And they haven't divulged how that changed or shifted yet, the filmmakers, but that was one of the things that had to be hastily rewritten. And you know what? It shows. The film feels kind of lazy in its last act. It's pretty good for 2/3 of the film. Really quite good. But it's that part that really falls flat. And there's another reason why it's the last act that falls flat, is that, generally speaking, somehow the final act is woven into the meta-narrative that is being dissected. And that is not the case with this film. The closest that this film feels very Scream 3-y in the sense that it's not placing any firm commentary on anything, but it's being a reflection of Scream 2. The closest film in its narrative that it is trying to reflect is Scream 2, right down to the killer's motives being essentially that of Billy's mother. And well, that worked for Scream 2 because that was part of the meta-narrative being talked about. Scream 2 is a deconstruction of the sequel. Billy's mother reveal is an inversion of Friday the 13th. Friday the 13th, you have the mother is the killer, and in the second one, it's the son. In the Scream 2, it goes from the son being the killer to the mother. It is a tip of the hat that is often in these horror sequels. Horror sequels also create some kind of family lineage, which is why the mother thing works in that as well. Similar to Halloween created and manufactured a lineage that wasn't necessarily there. This one was one that was a little more baked in and organic, and it worked. Here, it just feels lazy because they're reusing that same mystery that doesn't buy in or fit into the narrative outside of franchise. And franchises are often known for recycling what's been done before, but Scream is better than that, and I don't feel like that worked well, at least not for me. Speaking of the whole meta-narrative itself, the film really suffers in that it acknowledges film franchises, and it says these things in like Mindy's little sit down where she talks about it all. But the film doesn't really reflect film franchises outside of that very much. It very much tries to do its own thing, and that's fine. You can do your own thing, but Kevin Williamson was much better at really digging deep into how you can create a meta-narrative while also being the genre it is. Scream is a meta-deconstruction of the slasher film while also being a prime example of a slasher film. Scream 2, very much the same way, and Scream 4 is a meta-deconstruction of the 2000s obsession with remaking old horror brands while also having it just be a remake of the first Scream. It's very effective, and it feels very baked in. Even last year's Scream as a legacy sequel that oftentimes are just reflections of the very first movie in the genre, or in the franchise, worked. So, those four films feel very tight and strong. Scream 3 is a acknowledgement of trilogies rather than a deconstruction of trilogies. And this is an acknowledgement of franchises without being a deconstruction of franchises. The strongest piece of meta-narrative that's woven into this film is the post-credit scene where Mindy just says, not every franchise needs a post-credit scene. And it's literally that line and that's it. That is the most effective piece of deconstruction that is given. Otherwise, it's just a surface level acknowledgement of this is what it is. All right, let's get on with the mystery. But then you have a weak mystery, and it's not lost on me that those two films are the ones that are the weakest of the bunch when you look at that. This film is also tethered to the whole legacy of it all. I think they felt the filmmakers felt a fear that you can't do one of these movies without Sidney, without Gale, or without some acknowledgement of Dewey. And when Dewey is brought up, it's powerful, and it's a kind of a gut punch because you feel his absence in this, because you love that character. And Gale having to live on is without him is hard to watch. But the film ultimately doesn't really need Gale. It doesn't utilize her well, and it has her backtrack the one promise she made at the previous film at the expense of her character. I feel like Dewey would have been the one thing that would cause her to not be that writer. And the fact that she just wrote another book and then it manufactures a scene where she gets punched in the face again just as a reflection of Scream 2 is just franchise filmmaking at its weakest. Franchises traditionally aren't good, so why is this one buying into that? That's disappointing. The smarter move would have been to kind of withdraw from the legacy characters. There's no need to have had Kirby. There is no need to have had Gale. That said, Gale's set piece is insanely strong. That is the high point of the movie. Her Ghostface call with Ghostface is really effective and really, really startling. But it just, the rest of that, her use in this film is kind of unnecessary. If you want to have Gale in these movies moving forward, sure, you can do that. But have her just be the newswoman on TV. We don't need her to be involved with the ghost face of it all anymore. And I think ultimately they should do what they did with Sydney and just say that she's earned her happy ending. Because after 5 films, she sure as shit has. I don't need that character anymore. I've gotten what I've wanted out of her, and I want her to live on happily with her children. That makes me happy for her. I don't need her back in. Plus, I'm given all these interesting characters that we have in this franchise. This reinterpretation of Scream moving forward, this commenting on the horror of here and now. I don't need the horror of old anymore. That's what this franchise should be about, is the new characters commenting on the new waves of horror that we have, the A24 of it all, the Shudder of it all. And the filmmakers seem to be afraid to do so. I think moving forward we will get that, because this film, as brutal as it is, and everybody's praising the brutality of this movie, and it is. When Ghostface goes in for the kill, it's very brutal. It feels more Amber than Richie, but whatever. The film is weirdly toothless because it's afraid to kill anybody that we've grown attached to, because that's where the story is moving forward. And if that's the case, just commit to making a movie with them, so that if you do kill one of those, like Randy's death, like Dewey's death, it will matter. It'll make us feel something. When Chad died, I thought that was really powerful. But when they resurrected Chad, I was like, oh, just like Dewey in Scream 2, we're back there again. And so, like, part of me is happy because, honestly, Chad and Tara are the best parts of this movie. I really like Sam and Mindy as well, but they are the best parts of this movie. When they are selling the drama of their storylines, it is effective, and it's sweet, and it's funny. These are good actors that bounce off each other very well. They have good chemistry. I want to see that in another movie, so I'm glad that he's around again. And if he's the new Dewey character who gets jacked up every movie, I'm fine with that for a little while. But you can't have all these false deaths. You can't have the false him die, the false Mindy die, the false Gale die. It stops working. And I will say that, like, Scream had the false Dewey death, Scream 2 had the false Dewey death, but that worked because they had literally killed Randy right beforehand, and so when he comes back, you're just like, ah, oh, and it makes you feel good. They had the fake out almost death with the knife thing in his head in the third one, but basically he gets a reprieve in the third one, and the fourth one, there aren't really fake out deaths in those movies. So it took a while before they did the fake out death thing again with Mindy and Chad in the fifth one. To do it all over again with so many characters in this one just really didn't play for me quite as well. That's why I think it's weird that we're praising this film for its brutality while also having it be the most toothless entry in the entire franchise. And I think that's something that they have to commit to killing somebody in the next one, and it should be a gut punch of a kill. That said, I think they should always continue on with a character focus. That is what makes the Scream movies good. It is a character-focused franchise, not a killer-focused franchise. And this teased the whole, like, maybe Stu's still alive thing, and I was like, please don't. And I fear that will eventually happen. But, yeah. So, I want to start singing the film's praises. I think the core 4 are really good characters. They're really interesting characters, and they're characters I want to see more of. I think that the set pieces in this film had a good energy to them. Particularly that, like, convenience store scene is really effective. And you know why it's effective? Because it's Ghostface utilized in a different way, in a way we haven't seen before, which is why that opening scene worked really, really well. If this franchise is to evolve, it's not going to be by diving into the past, it's going to be by updating it and bringing us into the new generation, the new incarnation of what Ghostface can be, by reflecting that with which is in the media. And what's in the media these days? People who just gun out a convenience store or attack en masse. That is something that's chilling and scary, and that was one of the strongest beats of this film. And you can have your traditional Ghostface call kind of scene here and there, and make the whole mystery thing work. I think and I'll say it again, my pitch for what Scream 6 should have been probably is what they should do for the next one. The thing to comment on is toxic fandom, and the next form of that is toxic fandom demands to get a Snyder cut, demands to get an Ayer cut or an Abrams cut, or whatever the hell kind of cut you want. They should do that kind of thing and have a Ghostface who's just behind a computer the whole time, who that's the mystery of finding out who it is that is like getting these ghost faces to pop up all around the nation, and have like a large-scale ghost face kind of thing. And you can have multiple ghost face reveals if you want that are just as effective as the opening of this movie. While having the police try to figure out, or have Tara or Sam or whatever, try to figure out who's the one that is manipulating all these people. Because after all the Scream movies after the first one are people who are interconnected by the internet. Mickey is found by Billy's mother using the internet. Scream 4 is about these two killers that are looking to upload their own stab movie on the internet with real kills, a Faces of Death style Scream movie or stab movie. Scream 5 are about two people who came together in like a Reddit room as hardcore fans of Stab that feel like this franchise went off course and they're going to bring it back into relevancy. And they successfully did. I feel like that is what you should do, is have the dangers of the internet really exposed, because that's always been an undercurrent in the franchise, but never brought forefront. And I think that's what you need to do. But anyway, I've rambled on about Scream 6 quite a bit. Let me know what you thought of the film in the comments down below. Did the killer reveals work for you? I felt that they were having a little too much of having your cake and eating it too. It was the obvious character who had to have been the killer because he's the only one that would have had access to establish a shrine, and then having basically the only character left who wasn't involved with any ghost-facey scenes being the killer in Jack Champion, because it certainly couldn't have been Sam's boyfriend, because he was on the phone with them trying desperately to get a hold of them. He was never an established threat to me as being a potential killer because of that. And then you had the fake out death, and I guess this one surprised me, but it surprised me in that they did this trick on me again, and I thought that they might, with Quinn. And Quinn had the least lethal kind of looking death, where you can just put a prosthetic on the neck and make it look like you're dead. So I don't know. The film. The film is good. I want to reaffirm that. The film is good. It has high energy set pieces, higher energy than we've had since really the second movie. And that's great. This movie has energy. It has interesting characters, and I want to see where it goes for a third one. I just want them to be more creative with their approach. As is, they've just ripped off Scream 2, right after ripping off the first Scream. But that one got away with it, because that's what legacy sequels do. The sequel to the legacy sequel doesn't often rip off the one that was second in said franchise very often. Sometimes you get that a little bit with Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, but Last Jedi is not really a reflection of The Empire Strikes Back at all. Halloween Kills isn't very much continuation of Halloween 2's themes outside of making Michael much more of a vicious monster or whatever. These movies oftentimes kind of do their own thing with the second one and build its own mythology that is built off of the first Legacy sequel. And I think that's why I was most disappointed with it. But anyway, there you have it. Like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. I still give this movie 3 out of 4 stars. Let me know what you thought of the film in the comments down below. Peace.